Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We have a great show for you this week. We're going to talk about some pretty fancy cars, including one, a 911 GT3 with a manual transmission. We're going to weave a story from the Atlantic into it. So, hey, a little bit of mainstream press here that we think you'll find interesting. I drove the X7 in Alpina trim, which is very, very nice. Kind of a different take on the X7, which I like. To me, that's a nice way to look at luxury. So that's what we've been behind the wheel of. Lots of news this week. Meyers Manx Electric, the dune buggy, is back. We'll talk about some of the EV tax credits in light of the federal legislation that is pending in the House as we speak. Then we'll go through the Reddit rapid fire. Thanks to all of you who joined this week, the AMA. We had lots of fun, lots of good topics in there. So Byron and I are just going to kind of go back and sort of post game and, kind of riff on some of the other topics. We have some money to spend too, so this will be fun. So with that, let's bring in the aforementioned Byron, Associate Editor Byron Hurd. What's going on, man? Happy Wednesday.
Hey, you too. Hey, how about this weather finally breaking a little bit instead of just being ridiculously hot and sweaty for the past 2 weeks? This is a nice change.
Feels almost like a preview of like September. Those sort of early September days you get where it's just 70 and sunny, not much humidity, not too hot, not too cold. It's just perfect.
Yeah, it's getting to be like Oktoberfest weather. I can already feel it. I'm ready for it.
You know what that means, though? Not to be ominous here. That means like September is going to be 90 every day. And it's going to be like October 15th and we're still going to be like walking around in shorts like, well, this is cool. But hey, it's been actually a very nice summer as far as the temperature here in Michigan. There have been like a few scorchers. And man, this weekend was hot. I could not believe how hot it was. But hey, it is beautiful now. So it's a great day to drive a sports car with a manual transmission. The 911 GT3, for example.
Yeah, that was, oh man. I said in a tweet, I tweeted, that's what you do.
There you go.
I tweeted right after I had that car that I kind of thought that I'm not going to pretend I'm old. I'm not even 40. I'm still in this game, still a fairly young player. But I'd already kind of decided that like hard-edged track cars and stuff like that just really weren't for me as like daily driver candidates anymore. Because I'm like everybody else. I was throwing suspensions on my cars back in the day. Like I didn't care how hard they rode as long as they cornered great. I was that kid, and I'm really not anymore. And part of it is living in Detroit, where you just can't get away with that unless you're just really, really, really masochistic. So driving that car, I really kind of expected it to be overwhelmingly harsh, to be just too uncomfortable for the daily drive. And as it turns out, it's not. I mean, it's not a car that's meant to be cushy. It's not a car that's, meant to be fun. Sure, it's not a GT3 RS, but still, it's a GT3. And, performance is the name of the game. And, like, the night and day difference between driving that and, like, the I'm sorry, not the GT350, the Mustang Mach 1 that borrowed all the components from the last generation GT350. Just the whole sense of like you're driving a car that was purpose built to go fast around a track that is also really pleasant to roll around in on the road was so welcome from the Porsche and so absent in the Mustang. And it just kind of brought back into relief for me the fact that when a car is done well, it can be a performance machine that you can live with. And granted, the price difference between a Mustang Mach 1 and a 911 GT3, especially right now. I mean, sticker on a GT3, I think is, I don't have it in front of me. It's around 170, 175, I want to say, before any options. And yeah, it's almost triple the price of a base Mach 1. Sure, it's gonna be better. But it just kind of reminded me that cars that are built to go fast don't necessarily have to be unpleasant. And that got me thinking about Porsche manual transmissions, because the GT3 gets the 6-speed, not the 7-speed that's in the regular 911. It's a sturdier gearbox, I'll say. All the engagement of it is a little more kind of, robust, a little less refined. It in a way reminds me of kind of the way we used to look at American muscle car transmissions, where they were clunky, but they got the job done. And I'm not calling it clunky, but it's definitely not as polished as what you get in a standard, if you will, 911. And it's been kind of like a magnet for us as enthusiasts and people who actually have the opportunity to drive these cars, because it's antithetical to all the things that are happening with other manual transmissions. Like, it's just back to basics. It's simple. But the common thread with it, everyone complains about Porsche's manual transmission gearing. and having the really tall early gears, which is ideal for the track. Because the idea is, once you're out of first gear, you don't touch it again. Like you're on track, the lowest gear you're probably ever going to use is second. That's where that engine's designed to operate, and that's where the transmission's been geared to play. So again, it's another aspect of these cars where it's designed first for the performance, not necessarily for the street. And then we go and drive them on the street and say, oh, this is terrible. I hate this transmission. It's awful. But when you consider it in the context of what it was designed to do, it's just wonderful. And the beautiful thing about the GT3 is when you're running that transmission up to, name it RPM, it's the 4-liter that's behind you and sounds absolutely glorious. And, as a kind of person, I'm not a super huge fan of the flat 6 exhaust note, to be perfectly honest. It's fine. It's just, I'm more of a, V8, and it's just not necessarily my thing. I don't hate it. But the GT3, no matter how you feel about the raw components of it, whether it's the exhaust, the transmission, any individual component, the package is so holistically amazing that all the little things just fade away. And that's what really makes cars good. And that's the reason why it's so much better than the Mustang. It's not just that it's a Porsche. It's that the sum of the parts really exceeds each of them individually. And it's just, you forget about the flaws, where with the Mustang, you kind of get slapped in the face with them every time you start the car. So I'm relieved for myself a little bit in that it means I can actually enjoy some of these cars, even though I thought I kind of have to just like leave them by the wayside and say that's just not for me anymore. So driving that was a nice reminder of what it's like to drive something that's just supposed to go fast and not hating yourself while you're doing it.
It's interesting. I have crossed over into that sort of like same like mindset, if you will. I will be surprised when a sports car, frankly, I still sort of like it. Not that I don't love sports cars, track focused cars, but I'm kind of with you. Like you do reach a point pretty quickly. And it's not like even like, oh, hey, you turn 40 or you turn 30 or something. But like, I mean, literally there's a reason race car drivers are like 5'7", 23-year-olds, who are like small and young and like, like can live the experience of a car for all of its challenges. But, cars like the GT3, a far cheaper, far less like powerful example is the BRZ and the Toyota 86. Those are cars I continually think I'm going to age out of, and I never do. I enjoy the interaction. I enjoy, aesthetically, they're great. And the minimalist approach, to your point, you don't get overwhelmed with the challenges and the faults. You don't see those because all of the sum of its parts, it all comes together to really work in a way that's great for the operator, because you really do operate and drive cars like this. So, save the manuals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Speaking of, we both came across this piece in the Atlantic it just came out actually on August 8th. Maybe you read the Atlantic. Maybe you might be a little surprised to see that they talk about basically manual transmissions in the future, and where they're what's going next. Really nice graphic too, actually. I think it's kind of meant to look like a tombstone actually, with a 6-speed gear shifter up there. But I found the piece interesting now too. I was able to get behind the paywall. But I think I think the writer comes up, it's a nice discussion point, and I think the writer kind of sums up all of the things here that are brilliant about driving a transmission, and all of the things that note that who knows, how much longer they're going to be around. He quotes some figures here from like CarMax where it's like 2.4% take rate. I'm not even surprised at that figure. Honestly, if you had said, what was it? I would have guessed well under 5. So, such is the state. Jim Farley, on the other hand, the CEO of Ford, tweeted out when he announced that the new Mustang is going to be revealed in a few weeks here at the Detroit Auto Show. He slapped the Save the Manuals hashtag on his tweet. So as long as guys like him are in charge of like some of these things, you're still going to see manual transmissions. But I mean, you're going the way of the horse at this point.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting, like with the Mustang, and a lot of new sports cars, the Z, the BRZ, the GT86 or the GR86, I apologize. There are a lot of these that are kind of being done as carryover platforms to some degree, that you're seeing more. Even the car I bought, the Blackwing, it was essentially an ATSV that got retooled. And you look at them, and I'm wondering now if we're gonna, as we're going into the sunset here on internal combustion, are we going to see kind of the return of the parts bin hero? Because that's kind of the way people are looking at the Z revival. Like it probably shouldn't have happened, but we're lucky that it did, and they just used what they had in front of them and made it work. And that was how a lot of fun performance cars came to be in the first place. These cars weren't meant to be sporty off the jump. They evolved into something sporty over time. They spawned a sportier trim, or the platform was shortened and lightened, and a bigger engine was thrown in it, and you got a sports car. Like, that's kind of how these things came to be in the first place. And it might also be how they exist for their twilight. Like, I'm wondering, how many more truly new high performance internal combustion vehicles we'll see. It doesn't make a ton of sense from a development standpoint to invest a lot of money in it. And I mean, this isn't news. Like, this has been true for several years, but we're starting to see a little bit more of it. And I think that we'll see, look at Toyota, who seems to just kind of have like a skunk works outfit for every model that's coming out with these ideas, and Toyota corporate's ready to roll with it, which is great. I mean, it's nice to, like, I don't think anybody had Toyota Performance Revival on their post-pandemic bingo cards. It just wasn't something that anybody predicted 5 or 10 years ago. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, rumors are pointing to us even getting a new MR2. And where do you get an MR2 from an industry that is electrifying? Well, you're developing all these platforms that are designed to be modular in terms of powertrains. They can be front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive, because electric allows you that flexibility. Maybe we'll get some internal combustion fitted to these cars before they go fully electric. Maybe we'll see them as plug-ins. Maybe we'll see them as just regular old gas-powered cars. So I think there's some hope in this transition for people who still believe in internal combustion, which I do. I'm not completely on the EV bandwagon as much as I enjoy them and appreciate what's happening to the industry because they're being developed. At the same time, I still enjoy the cars we have now. I still enjoy my decades-old fleet and my brand new Blackwing. Like, you can like both, despite what they tell you on the internet. And I think there might actually be some good news hidden in this EV transition for people who aren't quite ready to let go of the ICE.
It's interesting. I would probably put myself as very much like excited and pro EV. When I examine my actual beliefs, though, and frankly, I drove a Lexus LC500 with the V8 last week. That also makes me remember how much, though, I don't want all internal combustion cars to disappear like the dinosaurs. Right. I definitely think you could pivot the transportation model to more electric, for the benefits it offers. But also, the world, the ozone's not going to collapse if, enthusiasts still have a V8 Mustang in their garage. That's, to me, that's like they're sports cars. There's always going to be a place to use transportation for enthusiasm. So I think there's always going to be a place like that. And that's one thing, I think you make a great point there, that the nuance of driving for enjoyment, one, it doesn't have to go away, but there is a different kind of enjoyment driving something that's, ICE versus electric. And electric can be better and it can be very enjoyable, but it also in some ways, not in some ways, it is different. A V8 muscle car is a V8 muscle car. So it's, I want to believe there's always going to be a place for people like us who are enthusiasts. And I do believe that. And whether it's not only the vintage segment, but also just you'll still be able to get some new cars that are probably becoming more and more, niche products. But, we're really in a good age for product development. Growing up in the 80s and then into the 90s, the cars that were cool were few and far between. And Jeremy and I talked about this on the podcast last week, how one of the reasons muscle cars, the Dream Cruise muscle car era, sort of grew in legacy so much is because what came after them generally stunk. You had the bumper regulations, the fuel regulations. From 75 until the mid 90s, we didn't get much. There were obviously some spotlight cars for sure. But I mean, it's not like now where your V6 Camry is pretty powerful, or, Ford will sell you any kind of powerful Mustang you want. So like, it's a much better time to like cars. And I hope some of this enthusiasm like is able to be replicated even as we, shift sort of business models. It's a good piece on The Atlantic though, to wrap it up. Give it a read. If you get a few free articles, this should probably be one. People must like it. When I think of The Atlantic, I don't think manual transmissions, but when I look at the bottom of this article, it says it's their most popular. So it's kind of cool.
Nice.
All right, so let's talk about the BMW. This is the Alpina X7. It is really quite something. Let me put it that way. It's actually, let me rephrase it. It's the XB7. So with Alpina, they tend to stick like B in front of all of the tuning things they do for the BMWs that they, fix up. And then when you throw the X in there, it gets confusing as opposed to just like the B6 or B7. I digress. This one was well into the six figures. They tuned the engine. So the 4.4 liter V8, which is also kind of like the mild hybrid, you get 612 horsepower with that. 8-speed transmission carries over, although they say they do some things to it. In simple terms, it's like straight out of the Alpina playbook. More powerful, really attention-getting, and also very much in the Alpina way, like the nice leathers, the elegant Alpina badges. I liked it. I think it was surprisingly not surprisingly, because it still just drove like an X7, only a little more powerful. Like the drive dynamic doesn't change, but man, people notice you. Those 23-inch spoked wheels. Mine was that kind of forest green that you see in a lot of the Alpina models. For me, like my big takeaway from this, and I drove the new Range Rover a couple weeks ago. I always have thought, like, when you're going to spend a lot of money, and a lot of money used to be maybe like $80,000, $90,000 for an expensive SUV. You want to go with the Mercedes, the BMW, or like the Rover or something, the Escalade. Now the new 80 or 90 is like $120 at least, frankly, which is chilling. Referencing my pedigree in the 80s and 90s when like $1,000 I could get a car, for college or whatever. But the differentiating factor to me isn't necessarily just like, oh, it's expensive or it's, pick your luxury brand. It's like, what kind of attitude does that vehicle bring? And I thought the Range Rover really brought it with that like gold paint and the gorgeous interior. And I think the same thing with the XB7. And I say that because whenever I make comparisons, I tend to sort of rag on BMW and Mercedes. I'm like, well, you could get an X7 or the Mercedes GLS, and they're awesome. They're great in every single way, but they're a little bit boring. If you want something different, check out the Range Rover or the G-Wagon, or sometimes I'll throw in Lincoln or something, just for things that are equally opulent, but also like different. They don't fit that like kind of button down shirt look that I sometimes rag on Mercedes, BMW, sometimes Audi for looking. This though doesn't do that. When you get the Alpina like dressings, man, to me, this is the X7 with attitude. So I really like that. It's a lot of fun to drive. 3-row. The third row up, this is noticeable on all X7s. There's not much room in the trunk. So something to think about if you're looking at an X7 versus some other large, luxurious 3 rows. 23-inch wheels with those. I can't quite find the exact tires, but they were like sporty summer tires. So I pulled up to my brother's house and he's like, is there any tread on these things? And then we looked at him close and he's like, wow, you're really driving for performance on M14. And I was like, yeah, that's what this thing's all about. I like what Alpina does. I think, if I were in the market for a luxury SUV, they're not cheap, man. They are not cheap. You pay for them more than they really are the top of the line, like way to have a fancy BMW and sporty BMW. But it's in some ways it is kind of worth it. It's much better than just like a tune that like you might get from, however you want to aftermarket outfit your BMW. Have you ever driven an Alpina? You probably have over here.
I actually have not. Now I was thinking about it while you were talking. I have not. But I've always appreciated them, and mostly because they do the kind of over the top German tuning in perhaps the most German and subtle kind of way. Even though, I mean, they're immediately identifiable. You see an Alpina on the road, you know. I mean, even before you look at it closely enough to recognize it for what it is, you go, okay, that's not, you know, a bone standard 3 Series, 5 Series, what have you. They always catch your eye before you even have a chance to process. So I've appreciated them forever, but no, I don't think I've ever actually driven one.
I've been lucky to drive a few of them at this point. The 7 Series, I think, was the first one that I drove in my career, if you will. I've been able to drive the B6, if you will, and a few other ones. I think the 4 Series at one point. I actually did a press trip with BMW for the Geneva show a few years ago. And this is when this is actually before they, I guess, kind of bought Alpina. And they really played up all of like Alpina's merits for obvious reasons. It was really cool. They were talking about like watches and wine, some of their side businesses. I got to have dinner at this restaurant in the old part of kind of the French part of Geneva with some of their executives. And so, I mean, if you will, I literally drank we'll say the wine, not the Kool-Aid, early on, and got a good education though on what these guys do. And, you know, it's always impressive because it's very rare in the car business where you see this kind of like tuner, but they don't want to be called a tuner. They call themselves a vehicle manufacturer, of course. And they've since been bought up by BMW, which probably makes sense for both parties, given the lifespan of the company. You don't see too much of this. It was a little bit how Shelby used to be with Ford. It's interesting. I've yet to get a good answer out of either company about what Shelby does with the Mustangs these days. So, I don't, I mean, it's a relatively rare thing in the business. So yeah. It was a good weekend in the Alpina. So yeah, that's drives. Between the two of us, we probably drove about $300,000 easy worth of cars in this podcast, probably more. Mine started at 142. Today. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about, let's kind of just wade into this new segment. It's kind of EV heavy. Meyers Manx Electric. It's everything you picture about the iconic dune buggy, and it's now being offered kind of back as an electric. I just think this is cool. This reminds me of some of like the icons and the, other like sort of, Back to the Future retro cars that come back as electric. So, ease into the news, but I think this is cool.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, it's one of those where like, okay, it's neat that it's a performance vehicle, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
And like I appreciate that. Like if you're gonna give me a car and it's also gonna be fun, great. But yeah, like for what it is, you could probably get away with a whole lot less. But the excess of it is kind of charming, especially considering how back to basics the rest of it is. So I really appreciate that. I think it's gonna be a winner.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope we see more of this stuff. As EV technology sort of matriculates across. I wouldn't call this the aftermarket, but like the smaller niche enthusiast market, if you will. Yeah. All right, now we'll buckle up. Let's talk about the EV tax credit and legislation that passed the Senate Sunday night. Kind of caught me flat-footed. This weekend, I sort of unplugged from work. I actually did a personal record where I didn't check my email from Saturday morning until Monday morning, which is alarming at times, but everything was fine. So reading the New York Times on my phone Sunday night, thinking, whoa, this is a big deal. There's a lot of nuance to it. A lot of things we kind of knew in the run-up, which is good. And there's some things that I don't think your average consumer is going to know, including some of the, like, sort of, I wouldn't say catches, but like the rules are different now. Let's put it that way. Like the batteries need to be essentially built in NAFTA, I guess, by 2029, if I'm getting that right. So that could be a challenge for OEMs. The vehicle has to be built in a NAFTA region by, I need to double check the year on that. So, I mean, it's essentially Initially, my impression of this was like, hey, they're trying to spur EVs. The more you read into it, and it makes perfect sense given it's like the US Congress, they're trying to spur American EVs, obviously. I frankly didn't quite realize that up front. I'll just be totally honest. Maybe I wasn't as read in it as I should have. But, the more I dug into it, I was like, okay, so there's some nuances here. Overall, I think this reminds me of like 10, 12 years ago when there were some like cafe regulations, and the goal was to pivot industry. So I think if this passes the House, which I'm sure by the time this goes through, it probably will have, I think it will have the desired effect. Like we were talking earlier, I think more EVs is a good thing. I think it's a good thing more for like daily drivers, and I think it's great to preserve, and that's how this gets there, because you don't need scale to make, or you don't need incentives to make expensive EVs, and you already have enthusiast like ICE models still available that I think they'll find a way to build. So yeah, it's kind of my rambling overview that I think it will be a net positive. I was a little surprised at some of the like language written in there. Again, that's not so much Congress surprised me. I was a little, probably should have been more read in on it, if you will. But it is a little more complicated than I would have thought. Let me put it that way. And I also think a good thing is the $7,500 like write-off. You can get that right up front. You don't have to like talk to your accountant about that. So, I mean, you probably should, but you don't have to like wait to file your taxes. So that's kind of cool. So what do you think? Maybe your thoughts are a little less all over the place than mine are.
I wouldn't count on it, honestly. Like it's going into this, it really seemed like we were headed for a net positive for pretty much the entire industry. And then, once it was finally said and done, it doesn't look quite so appealing for everyone. But
yeah,
I can understand where they're coming from. I agree. Of course, this this is the United States. We're not looking after the economic interests of other nations. So I appreciate that. And anything that keeps jobs here is a good thing. Can't argue with that. So I'm not personally miffed by it, but it is going to change, I think, the way we see EV development happen for the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully, mostly for the better. But that kind of segues into what we were going to talk about next, which is the perhaps the end of plugins, kind of the way it's been hinted at. And I'm wondering now, with the passage of this bill, if plugins will actually get kind of a boost that was perhaps unforeseen, because like we have the Jeep Wrangler 4xe listed on this as one of the vehicles that is pretty much going to just like fly right through this as if nothing happened. This is only upside for Jeep. And of course they have the Grand Cherokee 4xe now, although Grand Cherokee, I believe they source more of that from Mexico. I'd have to double check, but it being NAFTA, I don't think that's going to be a problem for them. So I wonder now if we'll see the fact that PHEVs offer an opportunity for electrification without as much of a financial commitment, if that's going to incentivize more cars and probably trucks, honestly, to shift in that direction. Because let's face it, America's big. In order for us to make a full transition from gasoline to electric, we need something in the middle. And that's what the plug-in offers. And until this point, plugins have largely just kind of been boring. And I think that's been the real strike against them. Like we see things like 4xe, which is a wonderful like performance-based plug-in hybrid. And we think, why don't more people like these? We felt the same way about our Volvo long-term S60 with the T8 powertrain, the supercharged, turbocharged, and electrified. I mean, that thing was fantastic. It wasn't a, corner carving sports sedan, but it was pretty fun to drive. It was super quick. It was incredibly comfortable. It was refined enough for that, tiny little four-cylinder engine. But it was a good all-around car. The Wrangler 4xe is a good all-around car. The Grand Cherokee 4xe is a good all-around car. And they're playing to an audience that will appreciate those things. So I feel like some manufacturers kind of missed the boat, even with going back to the Chevy Volt, which was essentially the first like mass appeal plug-in hybrid that we saw here. That kind of vehicle makes a ton of sense for the average commuter. But they made it dorky. It had to lean too hard into being a world-saving plug-in. It wasn't, that it was convenient transportation that also happened to be super efficient. It was efficiency first, and then everything else kind of was background noise. You look at Wrangler, where they just kind of dropped the 4xe out there and said, hey, there it is. It's a hybrid. You can plug it in. You'll get 20 miles of electric driving. Have fun. People basically didn't even see it coming. And with the pandemic ramping up and inventories doing what they did, there were stories of people buying 4xEs not even realizing what they were. And they love them. Like the response to it's been fantastic. So there is potential for plugins to do great things. This country's big. We need people to be able to get from place to place. And we also, because we lack charging infrastructure, we need to make this transition as gradual and painless as possible. So plugins fill that role beautifully, because it is a gasoline car when it needs to be a gasoline car, and it's an electric car when you want it to be an electric car. It is literally the best of both worlds when executed well. And I'm hoping maybe with more incentives here, because it doesn't require the same level of investment as a full-blown EV, maybe we'll see more good plug-in applications over the next 5-6 years, basically the next product cycle, because there probably won't be too many more after that aren't going fully electric, or at least trying to. But we could see some really interesting stuff come out of this, especially because if you take the 4xE especially as an example, these things are really easy to implement. You just stick an electric motor in between your gas-burning engine and your transmission, and the rest is just a matter of making sure the powertrain can handle the torque, which was easy for a Jeep because that's the whole point. But it's not like it can't be replicated elsewhere, especially in pickups and SUVs, where little changes can make huge differences in how much money you're spending to get that thing down the road. So there's opportunity here. I hope it's not too late for the industry to catch up on that opportunity. Like, it might just not be worth it for a lot of them. They're just going to have to say, no, we have to go all the way to battery electric, because the stopgap isn't, like, it just doesn't make financial sense at this point to invest twice. We need to go all in. That's going to happen with a few people. Like, we see, like, Honda's not really interested in plugins. Mazda doesn't really seem like they're interested in plugins, even though the range extended electric is kind of like a plug-in, even though it's not. So there'll probably be some people this, just kind of misses, but I mean, there's a lot of potential there, and I would love to see it explored more, because it's a nice balance. It's nice to get V8 power, V8 weight, not V8 power, 7 or 8 V8 weight. Like you look at even our EV6, the GT line. I mean, that's a 4,800 pound car with 325 horsepower. That's perfectly fine for a family machine. I mean, and it accelerates like a rocket. It's got pony car performance, but it's also, a pony car and change heavy. So, we're getting there, but in the meantime, I think we can do a lot better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think plugins are interesting because, I mean, they're electric cars, but it just seems like, the public discussion has sort of skipped past them. And they're very usable, like for a broad, swaths of the public. We go on vacation, and would I like to drive something like, I don't know, our electric 330e that I need to get my hands on? I haven't yet. I would charge that thing all the time in my daily, adventures. Just go get coffee, step away from the laptop for a bit, charge it up, away you go. Or I'd charge it at home. But I would love to be able to throw everybody in the car and know, hey, we're going straight to the Mackinac Bridge and we're not stopping. Like, I don't, obviously range is better than it ever has been on electric cars. But there's some challenges, I mean, if you're you're up in the Catskills or northern Michigan, or, some of the really like raw cut parts of like Oregon or Maine or anywhere really. I mean, the infrastructure is not where it should be. I mean, you can be in suburban Detroit and be, a few miles from a charger. So, or suburban New York for that matter. I think there's a lot of benefits to these cars, these vehicles that, you shouldn't like overlook them. I think, there could definitely be a lengthy lifespan for them. There's no reason to like sort of just ignore them, if you will. So we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity for both backward compatibility and forward compatibility, if you will. You get the advantages of being able to run on the existing infrastructure without any hiccups, and the advantage of being able to adopt newer technology as it comes in. And the thing that I think trips a lot of people up is, we say, well, if once we have the charging infrastructure and once charge times come down and range increases, this won't be a problem. And I mean, yeah, all those things are true, but that transition can't happen in even just the space of like 5 years. It's 50 years. I mean, look how long it took to get to the point where you could traverse parts of this country without having to worry about running out of gas. Mileage on the vehicles had to get there, and there had to be enough civilization in between to accommodate. I mean, that's, how a lot of these little towns popped up along the old national road routes. They were essentially just service stations that developed into population centers, much the way the railroad did before it. So what we're doing now is just trying to convert what exists. And in the meantime, you think of the battery situation, you're going to charge. It's not just necessarily that it takes 2 or 3 times as long to charge from, 20% to 80% or whatever our favorite metric is for that. It's the fact that once you get there may not be a station for you, which means you're waiting for other people to take their 15 to 20 minutes. You're waiting for perhaps a longer line because some of the charging stations aren't working. And all these little things that can be disruptive even with a gasoline vehicle, like the pumps aren't working, the teller's taking forever, the credit card reader's down. Yeah, all these things happen with gas. But you're taking all these incremental increases in time, resources, energy, wasted everything, and they compound. So, it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, it's going to take me an extra 15 minutes to charge versus gassing up. Yeah, maybe. If everything goes well, it's 15 minutes. So we need to not overwhelm either side of this too badly on the road to getting where we want to go. And I think a lot of people, especially in rural parts of the country, will embrace plugins once they get the chance to try them out, because they really do offer a lot that I think just a lot of people ignore because it just sounds like technology for technology's sake rather than the improvement it actually can be.
Yeah, it's we'll see. I mean, I think the other thing too is like consumer attitudes. I think with plugins, you probably get more people, who are like, well, hey, it still has a 4-cylinder engine in it. You're kind of dipping your toe into it a little bit more. So
yeah, and the biggest gripe you usually see from mainstream is just that like people buy plugins, but then they don't plug them in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you can only control so much behavior, right? It's good that they're trying. And, as I mentioned before, in the case of like the 4xe, maybe they literally fell sideways into a plug-in and it wasn't even something they'd envisioned being in it. They're still in a hybrid. And in a Wrangler, even the fact that you can get 1 or 2 mile per gallon improvements in city just in hybrid mode and ignoring the plug-in angle of it, it makes a big difference over the course of a year. So the bigger, the heavier, the more ponderous the vehicle you have, the better a candidate it is for something like this, because the improvements make bigger differences than they do in smaller, already efficient vehicles. And the bigger platform can absorb the weight, it can absorb the size. It's not as impactful on the overall packaging of the car. So you still get a vehicle that functions as well as something without a hybrid powertrain that happens to also have a hybrid powertrain. What's not to love?
Well said. Well said. Well, I think we actually kind of got through this fairly weighty discussion pretty smoothly. Cool. So let's, speaking of weighty discussions, thanks for participating in the AMA this week. Everybody who chimed in on our Reddit thread. We'll try to do one of these again pretty soon. Lots of fun, lots of good questions. Let's kind of run through some of them, and we'll get kind of get your take on this too, Byron. It's kind of like you were there. If you still want to hop in, the page is still up. We're not really, frankly, like, looking at it as much as we were, but if you want to hop in there, we are still kind of looking at things. So yeah, let's just kind of scroll through here. A lot of questions about the podcast. Here's one that I responded to. So did Zach. Why do you think there's a rivalry between the GR86 and the BRZ? Do you think there is one, Byron?
I mean, maybe between the fan bases.
That's what I said.
Because tribalism is tribalism, right? We'll all look for an excuse to do us versus them when it's presented. And sibling rivalry, I guess, would be the best way to look at it, right? Like we definitely have our preferences. I think I personally prefer the BRZ to the GR86 because of the suspension tuning, and I think that was true pretty universally for the original cars too. That Subaru was seen as kind of being a bit more balanced in their approach to it. So that I think that's kind of been there since the beginning. But yeah, I think most of this is just like, because it's fun to kind of have a rival.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It reminds me a little bit of college football. Like, you're not our rival, but yeah, you are a rival. But whether you want to be our rival, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a good kind of owner driven thing. Cause frankly, like Toyota and Subaru work pretty hard together to get these things to still exist, frankly. So,
yeah.
Let's see other things to run through here. Let's see, where was the one I wanted to? This is one of the nice things of having a long discussion is you almost can't find anything. Talking about cars that you might want to import now, as far as the rules start to, or cars that are crossing that threshold. It's 20 or 25? I'm suddenly blanking on that.
25.
25. What would you bring over, Byron?
So that gets you like late-ish 90s at this point. Oh man, that's I mean, if money's no object, and I would want one of the later FDR X7s, just because. I mean, they're Japanese Vipers. They're so beautiful. They're temperamental, which doesn't bother me that much. Most of my cars have been. I just God, I love that body style. It's gorgeous. And I mean, I don't think I have to defend the FDR X7 to too many car enthusiasts.
Yeah, that's true.
Except on the reliability front, which, I mean, I'm actually wearing, no one can see this, but I'm wearing my Felix Wankel Roto-Whirl shirt from Blipshift today. Our good friends at Blipshift. So yeah, I also have the one with the rotor spinning over like it's a UFO and says, "I want to believe," because that's pretty much the attitude most rotary owners have to take toward longevity. But yeah, that would definitely be my pick.
Sounds good. We got another question here about basically cars of the future. There were a couple. One was, how does autonomous tech impact speed limits? And my answer was, I could see it going up a little bit in like the broad parts of this large country between cities where, if you're in an autonomous car, whether it's driving itself and you take over, or it's like some sort of fully autonomous pod, which is almost more akin to a train. Yeah, maybe it does get up to like, it's 75 right now in parts of Michigan and some other like, states also that have like, I think Montana, that have pretty rural spaces, not in Detroit, obviously. But it's a little higher than the 70 that you see a lot of places. I could see it going to like 85, but I don't really think autonomous tech impacts like speed limits in the city unless you're looking at a different infrastructure, in which case essentially you're talking about the L or the train or the people mover. Because I mean, you can only go so fast in the city regardless of who's driving, right? So that would be kind of my couched answer, I guess.
Yeah, I agree there. I mean, especially like even if you're looking at something that has dedicated lanes, like a bus rapid transit system or something like that, like what you see in downtown Cleveland and some other places where they have dedicated lanes and even concrete barriers in between them, and they really discourage pedestrians. They still are caught in the same web of traffic as everybody else. And honestly, you don't want them necessarily going that much faster because they do mean that you're eliminating pedestrian friendliness, which is counterintuitive to mass transit in a lot of ways, because you got to get people safely to and from the means of transit if you want to try and get them around the city. So I'm with you on that. I could see, like you said, like a big like NASCAR draft train going down I-70 at 90 or something like that. Like, yeah, sure, why not? If there are enough vehicles that can, chain up and reduce the wind resistance and clean up the air a little bit, and actually, not deplete the battery in 20 miles, I think you could get people cooking along there.
Another question about what's up for the next generation of Camaro. We did touch on this on the last podcast. Lots of rumors out there. Short answer is we kind of don't know. Motor Trend had a piece about it might be a four-door thing and it might not even be called the Camaro. I don't really know. That's not a Camaro at that point, right? That's like the Impala or something. We'll see. I mean, I always think there's room for the Camaro to exist. Could be all electric. It could be, maybe it follows like what the Mustang does, whatever that is, which we'll find out in a few weeks at the Detroit show. I've always liked the Camaro too. I think it's, in some ways, I thought they just crushed the design, making sort of like a modern, but retro. Like the Mustang and Challenger are far more retro, and the Camaro, I think the design has always been good. Problem is you can't see out of it. So, we'll see. It's had the best suspension of any of the three. Engines have always been pretty interesting. But sales, it's always been a distant third. Not always, but recently it's been a distant third. So that's a problem. I don't know what changes that. Maybe they go and they do something totally futuristic. Chevy's designs have been crushing it. from what we've seen, like in the SUV side of things. They've been very aggressive. Maybe they do something like that. Maybe they go super retro. Like I frankly, I really like how it looks, but if they rolled out like kind of like an IROC 1980s look, I would be on board. That might be the buzz that might change the conversation about it. I don't really know. We don't have a lot of good intel on that. I hope we get more soon.
Yeah, and we know that GM has new sedan-sized and therefore potentially coupe-sized electric-friendly platforms they can work with. There's a new CT6 for overseas that rides on the new platform, Celestiq, whatever. I honestly don't even remember how Cadillac's pronouncing that. I would assume Celestiq to go with Lyric, because why not? But the idea is, these platforms exist, so there's potential for something electrified, and that can cross over. I don't know. The GM doesn't seem interested in a plug-in, so it would probably have to be like ICE alongside a battery option or something like that for them to justify the longevity of it, because there just really hasn't been anything coming from them that signals that they're interested in continuing that platform. So
yeah, no, it's a great platform, but it's the use case, to get kind of technical here, is pretty nuanced. Cool. Let's do a couple more here. We'll run through lots of questions here. What do you think of the Infiniti VC Turbo, cylinder deactivation and a few other things? This question I think is interesting because it's really more specifically talking about ways we're seeing like internal combustion engines optimized with some light hybrid tech that isn't necessarily in your face hybrid, with just all sorts of like ways to make the engines smoother, better. I think it's cool, but I think Jeremy sums up this one pretty well, and I'll toss it over to you. And that his point is that putting even finer points on internal combustion engines is going to see diminishing returns. And that's kind of, I think, where it's the best. Well said.
yeah, and honestly, like, I think the biggest problem with that engine is it's pretty much, I don't think it's ever been paired to anything but one of Nissan's CVTs. And granted, the two are really designed to kind of work in tandem, because essentially you have, variable compression meets variable ratio, so you're just always in that optimal spot. Yeah, that's great, but it's hard to kind of evaluate the engine tech on its own, because there's no context besides the CVT to really, to give it a fair shake. It's interesting, and it works. The car goes down the road. You can't argue with that. But yeah, I'm with Jeremy on this one. Like, it was a neat idea that 20 years ago might have shaken things up a little bit, but it, too little, too late.
Question here on if we feel any pressure from car manufacturers to write positive reviews for fear of like fallout. Short answer to that is hell no. And, if we ever did, again, the answer is just hell no. That's your credibility, and what you think about the car is far more important than, any particular relationship with any company. And frankly, if you sell out, what are you doing? Then you sold out to one company, and then, well, how does that impact every other car? It's a big market. So I think we're the same to everybody. So yeah, hell no, we would never yield to that. So that's one. Frankly, we all weighed in on that because we wanted to, and I feel like it's just fun to weigh in on that on the podcast. Close out with, here's a fun one: S2000 or Miata. What do you think, Byron?
Well, I've owned two Miatas.
Okay.
And I'll probably own more. I wouldn't mind owning an S2000. I have driven a couple, and especially the early engine was just phenomenal. But they're a little more finicky and more difficult to maintain than Miatas, and just more expensive for it, especially since they're far less available. They're just, the sheer volume of them is much smaller. So it really just kind of depends on what you want to do. If you want a good car to preserve and be like, look at this amazing high revving old convertible, S2000 all day long. But if you're going to, beat the crap out of it, you want to replace a lot of parts, you don't want to break the bank, you absolutely cannot beat the Miata. Miata
is tough to beat. It's like the Swiss Army knife of just like enthusiast sports cars. But I got to go with I did go with the S2000 Club Racer, please. Give me the yellow one. I adore that car. I still remember the first time I drove one, summer of 2008. Oh man, drove it with the top down the Lodge Freeway in Detroit. It's quite something. So that's what I would do. It's not quite as drivable as a Miata though. Like a Miata, you can definitely live with even better. But I mean, Miata, it's still a small manual transmission sports car. So,
Yes.
but yeah, definitely I would step up to the club racer if you can find one, by all means. So lots of good questions here on the AMA. Let's do two more for Spend My Money. So this is a fun one, asking about, let's see here. One of the Redditors is looking to buy a Focus RS soon. Market's kind of crazy. Yeah, it is. And even private sellers are asking $3,000 more than like the Kelley Blue Book private party sale figure. What do you think of this car? Will they hold their value in the near future? And will the price be stabilized? So if I were in the market for a Focus RS, and I wrote this in my response here, and I'll kind of expand on it. There's a couple things about it that are really cool and like for the time made it stand out from the crowd. You get that clever all-wheel drive system. The design is pretty good. The engine is very powerful. Even that's still like almost 10 years later, still holds up pretty well. Interior was actually not very good, but it had like the seats and the performance-y kind of aesthetics. So, I mean, that's all the things in its favor. That being said, it's at this point, even a like relatively newer one still probably has a lot of very hard miles on it. So that's something you're going to want to consider. I look, Haggerty might tell you, like they might be able to look in their crystal ball and talk about holding value. I don't think these things are going to go down in the pantheon of like, seminal cars of this time period. I don't think they're going to hold their value. I could be wrong on that. I think they'll probably find like what I would call it semi-collectible status, more than just like a used Focus, but not super expensive, to use a weird comparison, almost like a 73 Monte Carlo or something, it's from the end of the muscle car era. It's a little more expensive than like a 2001 Monte Carlo, but if you look for it, you can still find it. So that's one of the more bizarre comparisons I've ever made. I don't think it's going to hold its value in perpetuity. So if you want to buy one because it's fun and you like one, I would totally encourage you to do it. Prices are going to be wacky for probably another year at least, So you've got some headwinds here. You're battling, high costs of literally everything and inflation, and you're battling, like a car, or you're specifically honing in on a car that could be dodgy as far as its value. And frankly, I mean, there's going to be, I think, a limited life for like a hard driven hot hatch, unless you can find one that's got low miles and, you use it for sporting experiences in the summer, then yeah, of course, like any sports car, you can keep it for a while. So I would say if you want this, go for it. You're going to pay more for it unless you want to wait. And I would also say drive it, because I don't think the value is going to like, stay there if you keep the miles at like 50,000 miles or 60,000 miles. I think it is going to be what it is. So get it and enjoy it. That would be my recommendation if you're just going to try and plow straight ahead with this. What do you think, Byron?
I was never a big fan of the Focus RS, to be honest. Like I love hot hatches. I had a Mazda Speed 3. I had a Fiesta ST.
Yeah.
I've driven the RS a couple times, and it was cramped. It was harsh. That short wheelbase, even compared to the Mazda, it was much less comfortable. Which, I mean, to anyone who's owned just that generation Mazda Speed 3 and has never driven the Focus RS, they probably think I'm crazy. But yeah, I mean, it just never did a whole lot for me. Like if you want to buy a car to drive that is like that, I would go with the Golf R, because all around it's just a better vehicle. The RS is more special, arguably, because it's short run, short or low volume, and Ford didn't really spend a crazy long time doing that whole like let's do Europe in the United States thing. Like that pretty much extended from like 1999 to whenever the RS went out of production, 17, 18, something like that. So it was the let's do fun European style hatches as well. People will still buy them, and the RS was kind of the culmination of that. And I like it objectively, it's a cool, interesting car. It's just a little, no, it's way too high strung and over the top for daily driving. Like if I'm going to go way back to the very beginning of this podcast where I was talking about cars that are too hard for me, the RS is absolutely too hard for me, and it shouldn't be. Like I feel like the whole point of a hot hatch is that you should want to drive it every day. And again, maybe I'm old on a scale that, you know, there's like cosmic age and there's real life age. Maybe we're like car enthusiast years are shorter. I don't know. But like I'm just I can't look at that car and go, yeah, that's something I wanted to drive. And to your point, if you're not going to drive it, this is not a car I want to stick in a garage. It's not even like Escort Cosworth levels of stick it in a garage for me. So yeah, I would probably pass altogether and go for something that I wouldn't have that kind of lingering, like, do I need to try to preserve this thing in the back of my mind? Like, just drive it, drive it. That's the first thing I'm going to say. If you haven't driven one, you absolutely need to drive it because it very well may not be for you. It's a very polarizing car.
That's a great point. If like I'm assuming the Redditor has driven it. If you haven't driven it, you're going to want to drive one. And you're also going to want to drive like, you know, a 14, 15, whatever year you're thinking of buying. Because again, at that point, you're still driving like an almost decade old Focus, which is not a great experience on any front. So, you know, there's that. It's funny. I think we're roughly the same age. I think I've got a couple more miles on the clock than you. I actually think a Focus RS, I could daily drive that. So I don't know. Maybe I feel a little more youthful. I
probably have a better back than I do.
That could be. I don't know. That's good. But it's good to disagree on the podcast too. We can't all think alike on everything, right?
Right.
To your point though, if you are like considering the segment, there are better options. I guess to take a step back here, there are better options that you can go for than the Focus RS. Look at the Golf R, look at the Speed 3, step down performance, and look at the GTI, which is just a better daily driver in general. You know, there's options. So, yeah. All right. So that's a fun one. So let's close things out with, this is a surprising one. I didn't read this. You tacked this one at the end. So well done, sir. Big fan.
I think it got posted overnight, maybe.
All right. Big fan. Big question. I have some cars I'm considering for my first car, and I'd like to know which one of them is absolutely ideal. Although do know that I like sporty cars. Here's the options. Accord or Civic Si from Honda, Volkswagen Jetta, Acura RSX, that's a random one, Ford Mustang, looking at 05 to 10, okay, and Nissan 350Z. Once again, I don't really care if the insurance is high or anything, just want to see your opinion. Which one do you think is best? Please and thank you. Whew. Man, this almost feels like a knee-jerk one versus like overthinking it. What is your knee-jerk reaction?
Honestly, I think he put them in the exact order he should consider them. Just the fact that or he or she, I don't want to assume anything, but just looking at that, like if those are the cars you're considering, then that's the order in which you should consider them. Because I think the Accord is the safest choice and the 350Z is the most dangerous choice in terms of like longevity, durability, you know, all the things that are going to keep you on the road. I think the Z is probably the least appealing of those, but perhaps the most rewarding because I mean, a 5 to 10 Mustang, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're always going to have that in the back of your mind. Like I could have had a 2011, the post refresh, or I could have had a 2015 with maybe even just with the base engine. I think forever you'll just be like, I could have done better. The RSX was, you know, the end of the old Integra line. That's interesting in and of itself, and also a very fun little car. The Jetta, again, especially if you're going for like a GLI, sporty, fun, very practical. Wouldn't be my pick between that and the GTI, but I wouldn't tell you not to get it either. And then the Accord and the Civic Si, I mean, they've been so good for so long, you just can't you can't argue with them. So, you know, if you drive them and you know, just work in the exact order that you posted up. So like get to the point where you feel like, okay, maybe this is too much for me, and either stop there or back up one, and you're exactly where you want to be.
I think I didn't realize this, but yeah, I think this is the perfect order from sort of mild to wild. This is what you could do. I mean, if you want to be practical, you can't beat a Honda Accord or Civic, even a used one, as far as just looking at like, you know, reliability for what you'll pay. Volkswagen Jetta, you know, you start to lose some of that, but it's still a very practical car. RSX is kind of a random one. I don't know. That's kind of fun. If you like the Acura RSX, I would encourage you to look at that. You know, that Acura reliability, it's kind of sporty. that could be a fun one. I don't know why that one jumped out at me. So
Same.
I would steer into that one as a nice kind of compromise of, reliability and sportiness. And then you just obviously the 350Z is going to be rough. I mean, the modern 350Z is rough and was even until the redesign, even with the redesign. If you want to get an older one, you're going to be driving a car that really feels like it's from, frankly, the 90s. Even like a 2000s 350 is rough. Similar vein with the Mustang, although I kind of had a soft spot for some of those Mustangs. Like I thought they were a little underpowered, not necessarily for the time, although that old 4-liter V8 with like 200 and some horsepower was underpowered, even for like that time span. I don't know. If you like a Mustang, that's a nice way to get into the Mustang segment, I would say, to be perfectly honest. I think they're not as good as some of the cars that came after, but they were the first kind of like retro Mustang. And I sort of feel like that turn of the century look, it looks a little tired at this point. They've done retro a little better by kind of making it sleeker. But if you like the car, I own an 06 Charger. I think like there is something to that kind of like more simplistic, like, retro design. So I don't know. I would take a look at the RSX and then just kind of shift the needle either way. Like how practical do you want to be? How much fun do you want to have? And honestly, for a first car, you probably should look at like a Civic, just to be perfectly honest, a Civic or an Accord. That would be the safest pick and the most responsible pick. So, yeah. All right. Thanks for commenting on the Reddit thread. We had a lot of good conversations going on that. Had a lot of fun. Any summer drinks you're drinking here, Byron, as we enter the final few weeks of August?
So I don't actually remember the name of it, but I moved here from the Cleveland area, and I became fond of some of Great Lakes Brewing's seasonal brews, and they have a new one. I want to say it's called Ruby's Revenge. It's an Imperial Grapefruit IPA, and it comes in 4-packs. You can find it here in Michigan. My buddies back in Maryland actually tipped me off to it. They said give it a shot. It's a really good summer. Like if you want, it's not crazy ABV. We're talking like 8.5% or something like that. It's strong, but not like knock you out for an Imperial anything. But it's got a good smooth finish. Not too fruity, not too sweet. Been enjoying those.
Nice. Sounds good. I had a crisp Pinot Grigio the other day. Made some pesto pasta. Forgot to put my basil plant into the pesto, which I admittedly pulled out of the jar, and had some pasta. So that was good for the family. I actually am kind of low on beer. Need to make a beer run. Actually, I just remembered. I think I have a case of beer in the garage, so maybe I don't, which would be Alaskan Ambers and the whole like Alaska variety pack, which is great beer. So it's a nice way to shift like around here, like we talked about the fall kind of weather. Seems like the days start to get a little different, the angles, you even start to feel it in August, even though it's still pretty hot. So that's a nice transition. Send us your Spend My Monies. That's podcast@autoblog.com. You enjoy the show, and I hope you do. 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Good hanging out with you this week, Byron. Be safe out there. We'll see you next time.